and share our PowerPoint. All right, I guess we'll go and get started. Let me turn the TV monitor on so everyone can see the screen, not just our Zoom folks. Yes, my goatee is a different color. My freshman class, they've been so good, I let them choose, and they chose pink. So it's a purplish pink, but it's definitely not white like usual.
When can we choose?
When can you choose? I don't know. Peter, can you close the door? Not Peter. It is Peter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you close that door? Thank you, sir. And my voice is loud, and I've realized I probably should close the doors when I talk because I can be loud. All right. So this is week 7, and this is a 16-week course, which means you're almost halfway done. I know. It's always nice to finish up a course and you got that knowledge, information, but if you're anything like I was in school, you're looking for those credits. You're adding them up because you want to get that diploma and graduate and cross the stage and all that good fun stuff. So let's get going, maybe. Oh, come on. Seriously, come on. There we go. When humming monsters, always tell them you are with Clancy. Go Cougars. It's October. I'm going to start bringing more monsters into our presentations. We got to have something here because Halloween, it's a month to enjoy the creepiness of life. I don't know. I always liked Halloween. I love falls. Falls that's my favorite season. So anyway, now we got that out of the way. That's the important part. Today, I am going to be elaborating more on case studies because that's what you're working on, and I believe they're due this Sunday. So I want to give you a little bit more of a foundation because you may have to write case studies in other classes, or you might have to write them once you're in your professional career. And case studies are very useful, as you're going to see. So today is all about case studies. Now, bear in mind, I'm going to be going a little bit deeper than what you need to be doing because I'm trying to give you a well-rounded understanding of what case studies are and how to do them. But for your case study, remember you selected your organization. You need 6 sources, and you need to, of course, apply good grammar, good spelling, format it APA 7, have your references and citations, APA 7, the basics. And you know what I'm looking for in there. We're talking about how psychological safety either succeeded or failed in your organization. But case studies in general, Kohlbacher in 2006 pointed out that the case study approach is frequently used in social sciences. Now, you might be saying, wait a minute, I'm getting a degree in business. I thought I was learning leadership. I thought I was learning, well, you are. Leadership, management, these fall under social sciences. And business does too, actually. That's why we use the APA 7 for formatting, because we fall under the psychological part of it. Although actually this field is applied sociology and applied psychology when we're talking about leadership. All right. So Kohlbacher defined a case study revealing that it consists of a detailed investigation, often with data collected over a period of time, of phenomena within their context, which is precisely what you've been doing. You looked at an organization, you looked at a time period of success or failure, and then you found your 6 sources, you've collected your data, and you are presenting your investigation. So that is what you're doing. Case studies empirically evaluate real-life issues when there is no established boundary between a phenomenon and the context in which it is contained. And so they are useful when you're trying to understand why people do something and you don't really understand the difference between the actual occurrence, the phenomena, and the boundary of which is contained in the context. Kobacher and Ramini noted that case studies use multiple sources. For a case study, you're not going to rely on just one source. You might be talking about one organization, but you're using, in this instance, 6 sources. Now, this is where it's going to be a little, you're not going to be doing data triangulation, but I want you to be introduced to it. So normally in a case study, you need to triangulate your data. They may sound crazy, and it really isn't. This is a process of how research data is confirmed within a study using multiple methods. And so normally, if you're collecting data from literature, you need that's your primary sources. You find secondary sources that back up what you found. And that would be a form of data triangulation. In the case of my research project I did for my PhD in my dissertation, I obtained data through interviewing managers, and then I triangulated it using extant literature, meaning literature that is available. Okay, and so I was able to confirm that what these participants were telling me is actually something that's viable, it's useful, it's good data. The same authors, Kohlbecker and Ramani. Now, this is 2 different sources, but they confirmed the same thing. They noted that case studies, I already said that. I don't know why it's there twice. Okay, so case studies are used to explore the, oh, come on. There we go. Used to explore the desire to understand complex social phenomena. Remember that phenomena has to be contained within a period of time and a context. So your organization, that is part of that context. The phenomena is the application, either successfully or unsuccessfully, of psychological safety. And this is used to explore the how and the why when you're looking at research questions. So you're not so concerned about exploring the when, but how, why, what's the reason behind their success or behind that organization's failure. There are 3 kinds of case studies. There are intrinsic, instrumental, and collective. So if you're out in the workforce and you're asked to do a case study, you might need to determine which one of the 3 that you need to be doing. And if you find yourself in this situation, you can always return to an academic library or do a Google Scholar search on case studies and be able to find information on how to format it. Because let's face it, that might be 2 or 3 years down the road. And so what I want you to know are the basics, but you can get this information on Google Scholar. You can even Google it and just get a quick listing of what goes into a case study. This way, you can perform your duty in your job. Case studies as a research methodology are fairly new, and there are some researchers out there that criticize this technique. Whenever something new is developed or used, you have the people who have always done it the old-fashioned way. They criticize a new approach. You see the same thing. Those who are quantitative researchers, meaning they deal with statistics, they think qualitative research is not good. Well, I did qualitative research, and it is a viable way of understanding situations, primarily phenomena. As a matter of fact, some of these case studies we're talking about would be a form of qualitative research. So case studies are not a true methodology. When you get to grad school and you got to deal with methodologies, you could do a case study, but it's going to fall under another methodology. Okay, like my dissertation was a qualitative, descriptive, phenomenological. That gives both the methodology and my approach. And so you'll have to deal with those. Right now in undergrad school, working on your undergraduate degree, just knowing that case studies are a good way of understanding phenomenon in a place and time is really going to put you ahead of the game. So case studies are a research strategy. It's an approach. I wouldn't call it a methodology. I would call it an approach. So this means case studies often employ multiple or different research methodologies that could actually be a qualitative, a quantitative, or a mixed methods approach. So if you're dealing with statistics that you're getting from the particular cases you're looking at, then it would be potentially a mixed methods. And mixed methods is one of those methodologies where you combine statistics and you combine soft data. Soft data being interview data, reports from participants in other studies, etc. So if you look at a single case, what would I write here? Such as single case studies and multiple case studies or pairs. Okay, so you can do a single case study, which is what you're doing. You're looking at one organization and one event versus using multiple organizations or multiple events in that organization. That would be a multiple case study. So items to consider is you need to include a research question or questions, a proposition, units of analysis, connecting data to the study's propositions, and the interpretation of criteria. It's simple for the one you're doing. For the one you're doing, you are solely looking at psychological safety. Now, you could look at any of the 4 levels, and that would be defining it further. Okay, as far as for connecting the data to the study's propositions, you're wanting to understand, did they succeed or did they fail? And so you're connecting that organization and that phenomenon that occurred to psychological safety. And you're going to be telling me they succeeded. Here's why. Here's how. Or you can say they failed. Here's how. Here's why. So case studies, the case study can be exploratory, descriptive, or explanatory. You could explore the phenomenon to understand it better. You could describe it. Sometimes in academia, one of the first studies that has to be done is describing the phenomenon. What is going on here? Why are our stakeholders reacting the way that they are? Why are our shareholders reacting the way that they are? Why are they pulling their investments? You need to know the why. That will help you determine the question for future research. Or they can be explanatory, explaining something, explaining the process used, whether it was successful or whether it was unsuccessful. Case studies can be used to develop a new theory or to test the validity of a theory. Okay, that's true. I would say if you're going to actually develop a new theory, you need a couple studies. A case study would be one of them. But you're also going to need hard data, or you're going to need that qualitative soft data, and you're going to have to show how your new theory pans out over time and over multiple issues or instances of an issue. So the case study can be focused or broad. You can really focus its scope down like you are to one organization and either a success or failure of psychological safety, or you can make that scope broad. In other words, we're going to look at this sector, this industry, and the application of psychological safety. So in your case, you focused it down. Now, when you're looking at the design of a case study, you have to construct validity, internal validity, external validity, or pardon me, construct validity, not construct, construct validity, which means how you put it together, how you build your methodology. You have to show internal validity, showing that what you're claiming in your study is actually what the data is showing. You're aligning your results and your questions. If your questions and your results don't align, you still publish it. You still turn it in. But in the conclusion, you make the note. You say simply, this is what we thought was going to happen. What we found actually occurs is quite opposite. And that's fine. That still aligns your study, even though you did not prove your initial propositions. You make it clear that you found something else out. Okay, and then the reliability. Reliability means that if I do research on your organization, I will find the same thing. So if you're looking at IBM and you determine they succeeded with psychological safety for teams at this particular point in time, and I go back and research it using other sources, I will find the same thing that you found. Now, thankfully, as focused as your studies are and as general as they are, this isn't going to be a problem. And I'm not going to be going through finding sources and trying to disprove what you write. Okay, let's face it, I don't have time for that. But later on, if you go to grad school and you do publish something, it gets peer reviewed. If that's what peer review does, test to make sure that your data, your conclusions, that it's reliable, it's consistent over time, over different researchers, the same results manifest. So data collection. Case studies can use the following data sources. You can use documents, archival records, interviews, direct observation, participant observation, and physical artifacts. Okay, so documents is pretty straightforward. Archival records, pretty straightforward. Interviews, direct observation, participant observation. As a matter of fact, I'm willing to bet you the sources that you have compiled for your case study fall into one or more of those categories. Now, physical artifacts, that's a little bit strange. What is a physical artifact? Well, it's literally what it is. If you left it there for 3,000 years, an archaeologist could dig it up, interpret the language, and know what it is. It's something that is literally physical and contains information on it. So could a computer be a physical artifact? Yes. So in your case studies, you will most likely use documents, journal articles, studies, and organizational documents, and those may include archival records, interviews, direct observation, participant observation. You could use multiple sources, or you should use multiple sources. Whenever you do a research project, you never rely on one source because it won't stand up. Think about a stool. If you have a stool with one leg, you can't sit on it. It may have a seat, but it has one leg, it's going to fall. 2 legs, it's going to fall. You need a minimum of 3 legs for a stool to stand. So you're going to need a multiplicity of sources. In your case, 6. Now, if you have a stool with 6 legs, that's pretty solid. So your study should be solid. They shouldn't fall apart. And you need to maintain, you're going to create a small database. It might be in your notebook. It could be in a Word file. It's just where you keep your notes and you organize the data that you found. This author said on this date, this occurred. Boom, you move to the next note. And this way, when you write it up, you've got this to pull back to. You can easily connect data to the original source. So when you're doing studies, it's how you keep track of all those references and citations. And you need to maintain a chain of evidence. What I do is I make sure I have a stable URL in my reference. A stable URL means that I can go on a computer, type it in, and I'll pull up the document that you used. Not every URL is stable. If you have the ability to use what's called the DOI.org number, DOI.org, that is the most stable because that will remain the same document, will have that same number. No matter where you're looking it up, you can find it with that number. But not every document, not every journal has that. Most do, especially the newer ones. But for the older ones, you just put a stable URL and you will be able to find that. You can find that if you're using ProQuest or any of the major EBSCO, anything like that, you can go to the little site tab, and it will pull up all the different format systems, citation systems. You can select APA 7, and it will give you a stable URL that you can use, and that will be more than sufficient. The chain of evidence is literally your reference list. You need to analyze the data. Data collection and analysis are developed together in an iterative process, meaning that as you collect your data and you go through it, you evaluate it, you study it, you are learning step by step. So you will learn something from one article that will help you decipher, or even locate other information in other articles or other sources. And so it's a process like going upstairs. Each step gets you a little bit closer to your goal. Data organization can be based on certain topics, key themes, or central questions. And finally, the data need to be examined to see how far they either fit or fail to fit the expected categories. So with you, you could use, let's just say, you use the 4 stages of psychological safety as described by Clark. You go ahead, you discuss them briefly. Of course, give your citations for each one. And then when you find your information in your sources, you sort it out under each of those 4 stages. So now you've sorted your data. And a data analysis includes examining, categorizing, tabulating, testing, or otherwise recombining both qualitative and quantitative evidence. You may find statistics in your sources. Awesome, use them. Statistics are wonderful. You may find instances where employees or customers were interviewed and there were quotations from them. Excellent, use those. And those 2 things are going to come together and they're going to unite and make strong evidence for the claims you are making in your case study. Your claim is ultimately this organization succeeded or failed at psychological safety for its teams. Continuing with analyzing the data, you can analyze data using theoretical propositions, considering opposing explanations, or constructing a case description. A theoretical proposition is literally using a theory. So you could use, let's just say, stakeholder theory. And you have to give a little definition of what stakeholder theory is, tie it back to its original source. And when I say that, it's not just the original source, but who originally developed the idea. It's called the seminal research. If you have a seed, you put it in the ground, that is the seminal plant. It is the seed of the plant. So you want the seed of the theory. In the case of stakeholder theory, who was it? I should remember who did the original research. It's eluding my mind right now. Let's see, social identity theory was Tafel et al., 1970 or 1971. As social exchange theory would be Homans in 1948, I think. Okay, so you go back, you say, this is the person that originally developed the concept, the theory. Now you bring it to today, you find a researcher within the last 5 years, you say this person is using the theory this way, they're still using the same meaning, the definition, that theory holds up. You use that theory in how you analyze your data. You could look at opposing explanations. So you could say the company succeeded or failed at psychological safety for teams because the leadership did not apply humility or empathy. That is an opposing explanation. You can compare and contrast. Or you can just describe what you found. IBM did this, this, and this, and this over this amount of time, and this is what came of it. Now you want to report your findings. That's the paper you're writing. Okay, so you introduce it, you discuss your literature, your sources, and then you discuss technically the methodology. And in this case, literally, you're just doing a case study. You could say, in doing a case study on Google Scholar or EBSCO or whatever the database is, I looked up these particular things and this is what we found. Now you start presenting your evidence. So you use either your direct quotations, your paraphrased quotations, or you can present statistics, do your citations, and you report. This is what occurred at IBM. Their team self-censored. Their team created an in-group versus out-group mentality. Us versus them. You explain what you saw. Kohlbecker called this form of reporting a narrative. You are basically telling me a story, but it's not a fictitious story. It's a factual story based on the 6 sources you provided. And if one of your sources is Clark, the textbook, I say great, because you're going to need that anyway. You have to define psychological safety. You're going to need to define what stage of psychological safety you're looking at, or potentially all the stages. So you're telling me a story. You're telling me what psychological safety for teams is. Then you're showing me how your organization succeeded or failed. Remini et al. 2002 discussed the potential of storytelling in case studies. A case study, unfortunately, can be overused. Sometimes you don't need a case study, and people just use them. It's like a new fad in academia. You don't have to always go with the fad. However, in teaching, a case study is essential. It's called a pedagogical device. That's a fancy word for saying a teaching technique. Students are then asked to discuss how the actors in the case behaved, what their motivations might have been, what they might have done differently, and so on. That paragraph right there sums up your project that you're working on. You're discussing how the actors, meaning the leaders in the organization, behaved. Potentially, what motivated them to either succeed in providing psychological safety for their teams or fail. You can also point out what they should have done differently. And that's kind of one of the last things you do. In your conclusion, you bring up what other studies should be done to more fully understand that topic. Is more research needed on it? If so, what would you recommend? Would you recommend actually boots on the ground collecting data? Would you recommend further case studies? Would you recommend looking at similar organizations within that industry and to see how they handled the situation? So by presenting complex and contradictory situations, the case study goes directly to the core of the skills required to cope with real-life situations in a modern business. Meaning, the simple fact you are doing a case study means you are learning how to evaluate leadership. You're learning how to evaluate situations. And these are all complex because there is a multitude of factors affecting that situation. You are learning as a leader how to evaluate and identify as many of these factors as possible. So later in life, when you're a leader, this skill is going to help you in observing and evaluating your team or organization. Case studies also allow for students to explore and discuss various situations, which is exactly what you're doing. Your conclusion of your case study is going to be the exploration. You've gone through it. Now you're going to be discussing what you found in your exploration. Everything you write before that is part of the exploration. Now you're concluding it and you're reporting your findings. You're telling me what you found out. What was the story behind the success or failure of psychological safety in that organization? And you got to be very specific because your focus is specific. So you don't talk about every organization on the planet or even every organization in the industry. You're talking about one organization in one period of time. At that time, they succeeded. Here's how. At one point in time, they failed at psychological safety for teams, and here's how. So your case study is going to allow you to explore situations in various businesses. Now, while you're writing it on one business, you had to identify 3 at the start. So you're already getting into the mindset of, great, I need to look at one, but let me see what some others did. Let me look at some other examples. In other words, you compared and you contrasted. As a framework, case studies as a framework to collect and document evidence about a phenomenon and about where the researcher is not particularly interested in the specific circumstances of the case in question. Case studies allow you to collect and analyze data pertaining to psychological safety. The actual circumstance could have been something else with management. It could have been the hiring process. It could have been the disciplinary process. but you're concerned about psychological safety. So the actual circumstance that occurred is peripheral to what you're looking at. Yes, you mentioned the circumstance, but you are the researcher looking at psychological safety, success or fail. And if so, how? And if not, why? Case studies, and that should be plural, case studies may be used as a research objective in its own right. Meaning, once you're either in grad school or in your profession, you may be called upon to do case studies. It is a method of doing research. You don't have to be in grad school or college to do research. You may be working somewhere, and because you're a supervisor, you need to do research. Or you might be part of a team, and that team is preparing documents to give to the board of directors. You need to do research, so when you write your documents, they contain facts pertaining to the question at hand. So case studies are a story or narrative. They use many sources. In your case, 6. The data needs to be triangulated. Now, I said that's not something you have to worry about. Let me explain a little bit. Here's why you don't have to worry about it. You're already doing it. Because how many sources are you required to have? 6. So you're already engaging in data triangulation. So it's part of your process, but you're already doing it. So it's not a big deal. It's not something you got to like overthink. Case studies are, or they do, give meaning in context. You're giving the meaning in context, meaning you're explaining psychological safety, success or failure in the context of that organization at that time in that situation. Very focused. You're evaluating specific issues. You're not worried about the hiring interview process necessarily. Maybe you are, but in this instance with IBM as an example, I'm not looking at the hiring process. I'm not looking at the termination process. I'm looking at team management, the interpersonal connection between team members and supervisors. Is it psychologically safe as described by Clark or not? You look at an organization, a situation, or a context. There's a limited scope. Now, some of this is repeating, but it's because it's important. It's a limited scope. You have a question about an instance in time around a certain situation within a specific organization. That is pretty specific. And you started with 3 organizations. You're down to 1. And I'm willing to bet you your papers are coming along really nice. Yes, I've seen the first draft, but I'm saying since then. Case studies are, or once again, it's hard to choose the right word there because there's 3 lines under that, and each one could be a little bit different. Case studies immerse you in the topic. You've been reading about your organization. Peter, what's your organization? Amazon. So I bet while reading about Amazon, you haven't been trying to understand that situation in IBM. You stayed with Amazon, right? Exactly. You are looking at that topic. You are immersed in that topic with that organization. You haven't distracted yourself by looking at NASA. Case studies, they use qualitative or quantitative instruments. An instrument in research is literally a tool. While a video camera is an instrument, that's not the instrument we're talking about. When I did my dissertation, I used an instrument. I created an instrument. It was an interview, a set of interview questions. That's the instrument. For you, the instrument that you are using are the articles you found. Not only are they your source, it's also the instrument you're using. It's the research tool that you turn to in this case. And of course, case studies allow you to evaluate multiple levels on this topic. Even though you're hyper-focused, you are getting some peripheral information in there. Perhaps there were some other factors that preceded the failure of psychological safety, and they need to be noted. You're like, well, this is too important. We'll put that in. That's a layer that's needed. It relates to your focus. It's within your scope because it deals with the problem you're describing. Case studies are something that you use when you're seeking to describe a situation using a narrative approach. Your projects are building you up to see the various systems in an organization. When you are done with this class, you will be better prepared to work in your field, in an organization, and make the observations needed to engage yourself in the decision-making process. You might have to make the decision of implementing psychological safety for your team. That is a decision. You need to evaluate the costs. You need to evaluate the process, the time investment, resource allocation. Case studies can help you in understanding innovation, entrepreneurship, perseverance, and success may be described and understood. And they're also able to help you delineate or explain or describe in this narrative. You're describing what happened, what fell apart, what came together and built up psychological safety in that team. Your case studies may not seem like much, but you are being given a wonderful tool that you'll be able to use for the rest of your life in understanding situations, preparing yourself to make decisions, or even in the development of policy and procedures. And I have a surprise for you at the end of today's lecture, and I think you'll like it. Case studies, continuing, you can compare and contrast 3 organizations. That's what you did originally. Now you've moved to 1, correct? You're down to 1 organization. So when you're writing up your paper, you could mention that you had originally looked at these 3 organizations. And then you can give me your rationale why you brought it down to just that 1. Not just that you were told to, but why did you pick that 1? What made Amazon stand out? Whoever your company organization is, what made your attention turn to that organization? See, I'm giving you tips that will help you hit that page limit, that page requirement. Remember, you're telling a story about psychological safety. Describe the stages. Use references back to Clark and Edmondson and the resources we've been using. That will help you reach that page requirement. It'll make sure that you hit the requirement for 6 sources. I'm giving you little tips. Romani et al. In 2002 discussed that most business issues evaluated are a story. Remember, we've talked about organizational stories, how organizations in the past were either good or maybe bad. Maybe they were racist back in the 40s and 50s, but how they went through a process of change and development. These stories are narratives. Businesses from start to end are technically a long story involving many people over many years. And there's many little subplots that can come out. Look at an organization like a novel. So Woodside and Wilson define case studies as the inquiry focusing on describing, understanding, predicting, and or controlling the individual, i.e. process, animal, person, household, organization, group, industry, culture, or nationality. And I have an issue with missing a parentheses. I'm gonna have to fix that. Anyway, case studies are an opportunity for sense making. You are making sense of the story of that organization. You're looking at the people, the processes, the policies, the procedures, that went into the success or failure of psychological safety. You're looking at organizational culture. You're looking at, you could even look down into the nationality of that organization. If there's a company in India, they're going to relate the issues differently than a company in England, differently than a company in Singapore. You can take that into account. That could be another part of your paper where you tie it together. You're presenting the story of that organization with the subplot of psychological safety for teams at that time period. And you do this by looking at the big picture. Sense making is always about the big picture. You analyze each element, but then you step back and you look at how everything is connected together. You must dive deeper into the specific issues. Was inclusion safety practiced? Was learner safety practiced? What about contributor safety, challenger safety? Did you see evidence of those? You've already given us definitions of those stages. You've used Clark as your reference. Now, the organization you selected, did they demonstrate these in what they did, their actions? Is it reflected in their policies? Case studies, actually, they examine mental models. Mental models, and I think I got more on that. Do I? No, I don't. Okay, so mental model, and I thought I do actually have more, so we'll hold off on that. Case studies describe the following. The typical steps, meaning persons, conversations, behaviors, or events. What steps did the leadership of the organization take? They describe the typical process, meaning the participants' normative mental model. What were they expecting? Okay, so I thought I had the definition of mental model in this slide. Let me just see if I can find it real quick, because I should have put it a little sooner. Okay, we'll do this slide, then go back to mental models. A lot of what I talk about when it comes to mental models comes from Peter Senge. He's a professor at MIT. He is a very renowned scholar in leadership and in systems theory and stuff like that. Brilliant man. Researchers often need to catch the mental models, and they do that in their studies. Mental models are how the individuals in the organization view their participation in the matter being studied. What did they see? When you play hockey, when you play baseball, you have a mental model of what it looks like when you perform your task, your role, your position on the field. Bios, what position do you play? You play soccer, right?
Yeah,
What position do you play?
I'm a goalkeeper.
Okay, so your mental model is that of a goalkeeper, not that of any other position. You may know what they're doing. You may be able to do it, but you are the goalkeeper. So your mental model, you go there, you've got this information, pulls up in your brain. This is what a goalkeeper does. Then you do it. The same thing happens in organizations. Leaders have mental models. They take that mental model, and that's like the set of instructions they use to carry out the task. And in applying psychological safety for teams, our mental model, we used Clark in his book from 2020, Psychological Safety for Teams, right? The 4 stages. We apply that. That's our mental model. So we, as researchers, as academics, look at these organizations using that mental model. Just like a goalie has the mental model of what a goalie is supposed to do. So we go and say, this is psychological safety for teams. Let me see where I can find it. And in the process, we're trying to see, can we identify that leader in that organization? What was his or her mental model? Were they, yes, psychological safety for teams? Or do they seem like, yeah? You're not going to find quotes saying the leader said the psychological safety for teams should be practiced. If you do, awesome. But more than likely, you're going to see that leader putting out policies that promote psychological safety for teams. And you can inductively say then, this leader was trying to enact this aspect of psychological safety. You don't have to have a statement. Ralph said this, this, and this is the psychological safety for teams challenger stage. If he puts out a policy or makes a rule or operates in a way that demonstrates challenger safety, you can claim that. It's there. You got the proof. So now that we got that taken care of, let's go back to here. Case studies describe the following. What actually occurred in a given process, for example, the most recent process completed or a completed process strategically important for the organization. You are describing the process that organization did that can be identified as psychological safety, success, or failure. That's what you're describing. You're writing me the narrative of that event. The participants' perceptions of how another specific person or others in the organization in general understand the details of the process being examined. So is there evidence that the employees under that leader understood the policy that led to inclusion safety? Were there meetings held? Were there training sessions? Or was a policy just written, put out there, and nothing done to follow it up? So this is how you're evaluating that success or failure of psychological safety. And it says 3 organizations, but you are doing 1 organization. I want to make sure I clear that up. I don't want people panicking, thinking suddenly now it's 3. It's 1. If you give me all 3, great. You did 3 times the work, and I'm still going to grade it. And you're not going to get docked points because you gave me 3 organizations, as long as you met the criteria. So just do 1 organization. If you've already got 3 going, keep it going that way. You're not going to lose points. And if you've got 1 organization, you're doing what you're supposed to. Don't worry, everybody's cool here. Mental models. Okay. When you look at mental models, let's go back to Vios being a goalie. Vios has got the mental model of a goalie in his mind. You got to consider feedback loops. A feedback loop, in the example of Vios, would be a kicker on the other team gets the ball, makes a play, and he kicks it in. Now you have to respond to that. Your mental model helps you respond to it. Your response is you block it, catch it, whatever you got to do to prevent them from getting a goal. That would be an entire loop. In organizations, feedback loops are similar. An employee responds to the supervisor bringing in a policy or a procedure that's going to promote psychological safety. That employee, that staff member, then has a reaction to it. There's your feedback loop. It could be something they communicate verbally. Perhaps there's a description of how they displayed nonverbal communication. Did everybody leave acting like they were disgusted from the meeting? Did they give negative comment cards at the end of the meeting? Or did they go out acting like they understood it and then did the complete opposite? That's still all part of the feedback loop. You're getting your response to what was presented. So a core proposition within the mental models of most case study researchers is that the operational data often vary widely from the presentational data. What things look like at first glance may not be the reality. So you use multiple sources. It gives you more perspective. One researcher might claim that Amazon did X, Y, and Z. Success with psychological safety. Another researcher looks at the same thing, says, yes, they applied X, Y, and Z, and it may look like psychological safety was implemented, but in reality, over a 3-month window, here's evidence as to why it wasn't successful. So we'll go back to data triangulation. And you're looking at what did it look like originally compared to what is the reality after you finish digging. An archaeologist goes to a plot of ground, takes his tools or her tools, and starts digging. The deeper they go, the more they find. The more they find, the better they can explain. So if you want to explain what occurred, get as much information about that circumstance as you can. Now, you don't need to concern yourself overly too much with mental models. I discussed them briefly so you can have a deeper understanding of how they affect case studies, but I'm also a little tricky because mental models affect how you lead as a leader. They affect how you follow as a follower. They affect how you are as a student. They affect us in every part of our life. I go to Walmart. I park my car. I get out. I go in. I'm operating on a mental model. The mental model is I have a need. I go to the store. I'm going to buy something. Their mental model is a little different. They want to trick me into buying more stuff. So they put stuff around the register. That's called point of purchase, POP, merchandise, POP, point of purchase, merchandise. They want that stuff right there. So when I'm getting ready to check out, I look over and I see a Snickers bar. I haven't had a candy bar in months. I've lost 20 pounds. Not just from not eating candy, but I'm exercising too and eating right. But I'm not listening to their mental model. I've chosen to follow a different mental model. So as a leader, you're going to need to decide what mental model are you going to operate with in that situation. I'm trying to help you. So when you are presented with needing to implement psychological safety, you have a mental model to turn back to. In your accounting class, you're given a mental model so you can turn back to it when you are doing accounting. So you are basically looking at nodes and loops inside your case studies. Nodes and loops, that's something you're going to get more of over the next 8 weeks. Let's think about this class. We want to look at us as a system. MGT 4950, this is the system. Each and every one of us here, myself included, is an element or node. They're the same thing, elements and nodes, same thing, just different words. I can be studied. You can be studied. But if we want to understand the system, we need to look at the loops between us, the interconnectivity. Peter and I have had discussions outside of the lecture environment. Vios and I, these young ladies and myself, Matapaz and Mika, thank you. That's so sorry.
Don't worry.
I only have like 12 million students this semester, so it's y'all need name badges or something. So what's the loop? The interconnectivity, the communication. Okay, that's what you're looking at. You're looking at the people involved. How are they interconnected? Is that connection, the interconnection, is it psychologically safe, as we have learned from Timothy Clark? And so the application of psychological safety is involved in that loop or link. Just like nodes and elements are the same, loops and links are the same. And I'm going to be teaching you over the next 8 weeks something really cool. I'm going to teach you like 3 different kinds of graphs that you can do to understand an organization. We are actually going to be learning and graphing Dracula. I bring Dracula into every time I teach this course. We're going to learn about Vlad Tepes III. That's the person Dracula is based on. We're going to learn about the political things that were going on in 3 major systems around him. We're going to learn how everything was connected, and you're going to learn how to graph it out. You are going to have a skill when you leave out of here that will help you. I've used these graphs, causal loop graphs. I've used them in trying to understand personal relationships I've been in. They're so useful. You can use them in business. You can use them in your personal life. They're just useful. You're going to learn great tools. I'm sorry. I get excited about the second. I love psychological safety for teams. I adore it. But there's something about the second half of this course that I just get so fired up because it literally has changed my world. It has changed how I view things, how I interact with things and people and places. And it has brought more richness and fullness to my world. And it's not this great philosophical system. It literally is just understanding everything is so complex. How does this complexity all impact me at this moment? Anyway, I digress. So in concluding, don't hesitate to contact me if you need any help during this. During your case study writing, please contact me. My phone number is it's in the announcement page. Text me. Just make sure you mention who you are and what class you're in, because with the 5 classes and 2 quadrillion students, I need that information. It helps it when I go to answer. I'm here to help you. All right. If you use a systems graph in your project, it's not going to count for the page total because we're not dealing with systems graphs yet. All right. If you include it, you're going to be showing a lot of initiative, but it doesn't count to the page total. So if it takes up half a page, make sure you have 6.5 pages that you submit in. Okay. So I'm just making sure everybody's clear on that. Now, before I give you this wonderful, wonderful surprise, does anybody online or live in concert have any questions? Any comments? Anybody want to throw rotten fruit at me? Rotten tomatoes? No. It's old seafood. Anyone want to throw rice at me? What do we want to throw anything? No, okay. Any questions on Zoom? All right. Now here's the moment you've been waiting for. What has this crazy professor been teasing you with? Well, you got a lot of work to do in your case studies. I've given you everything plus more about case studies. I've given you tons of information. So Wednesday, we're not going to have class. Use that time to work on your project. And if you got other stuff you got to do, great. You can do something else. But now you are freeing up an hour and a half that you can move wherever you need it. So you have a little extra time to work on your project this week and your assignments and ultimately this case study. But you have to promise me, if you wind up stuck or needing help, that you'll contact me. Email me, text me. We'll have a phone call, a video conference, whatever we need. Is that a promise? You guys will contact me if you need help? All right. Then no class on Wednesday. And I will be posting that in the announcements later today when I upload this video and these slides. Give me 1 second. I've got a chat box. Okay, Xander is with you as well. I got that, Austin. I'll mark him down. All right, so no class on Wednesday. Don't go try to sign in. I'm not going to delete the class because I have it set up for every single Wednesday. It pops up and I like it automatic. I don't have to think. One less thing I got to think about. And since I'm moving this week, it works out really good. We all get a little extra time when we need it most, it seems like. I'm going to go ahead and close this class out for the day. Everybody on Zoom, be safe leaving the university and going back to your house. You're already there. Y'all have a good day. And those in class, be safe getting on home or wherever you got to go. Stop the share. Hold on a second, my classroom folk. All right, everybody online, this is it. I'm going to sign you off for the day. All right, Jacob. Y'all have a great day now.